Welcome to Glioblastoma AKA GBM, a podcast brought to you by the Glioblastoma Research Organization, highlighting stories of GBM warriors, caregivers, medical advisors, and more. Welcome to Season 3 of our podcast, where we delve deep into the world of glioblastoma, also known as GBM. Join us as we navigate the complexities of glioblastoma with expert insights and heartfelt narratives. Please remember that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, or prevent any disease, and you should contact your medical provider or healthcare team with any questions. Novocure is pleased to support the Glioblastoma AKA GBM podcast. Novocure strives to extend survival in some of the most aggressive forms of cancer through the development and commercialization of their innovative therapy called Tumor Treating Fields. Novocure partners with the Glioblastoma Research Organization to work together on behalf of patients and their loved ones impacted by GBM. To learn more, visit novocure.com. Dr. Sheri Dewan, welcome to the Glioblastoma AKA GBM podcast. I am so excited to have you here today and to talk about you, your practice, your experience as one of the 219 female neurosurgeons in the country, which is unbelievable. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I love coming out here and seeing you in Miami and your beautiful studio. Thank you so much.
So for those who don't know who you are, I'd love for you to explain a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so, I was kind of a science nerd when I was a kid. I loved reading books. I would spend a ton of time at the library. I was fascinated by the brain and by neuroscience, really. And I kind of just fostered that desire as I got older. Started getting involved in seeing surgeries, being around doctors. I didn't have any doctors in my family. So they were all academicians, educators. And really decided that neuroscience was going to be what I wanted to do with my life. And then my mom actually had an aneurysm rupture when I was in my 20s, and her life was saved by a neurosurgeon, Doug Johnson. And so that really, caused my path to pivot, and really increased my desires to go into the field of neurosurgery. So I had the interest in the brain from a very young age, but because of the circumstances that I found myself in, it kind of shaped my path.
Yeah. I know for a lot of residents, not even like medical students, when you're applying for residency, you have a particular image in mind. And for you, you're saying that neurosurgery or the brain was something that you wanted to do from a young age. Did you ever have a backup plan if you didn't match into a neuro residency?
It's actually funny because I didn't.
Okay.
So, and I don't know if I would honestly advise it because it's gotten so competitive now, but, the only thing I applied for was neurosurgery, and I was the only medical student to match that year in my class.
Wow.
And, I had kind of danced around neurology as a potential option, and I would have been happy with that. But, it was something my husband, Alex, said to me, and he says this to me a lot, which is, look 10 years ahead, right? And then think about the things that you wish you could have done or should have done or would have done. And so neurosurgery was that pie in the sky for me, and I thought, if he's going to support me through this, and understands what that life looks like, then I have to go for it. So I went for it. I had no backups. I interviewed at 18 programs and I ranked 16, and I got, one of my top choices. I went to Brown. At the time when I started at Brown, I was the third woman neurosurgeon they had ever taken.
Wow.
But the one ahead of me was separated by almost 13 years. So they had no concept of what a female neurosurgery resident would be. And so in the book that I wrote, I actually talk a lot about when I showed up to round on patients, and the nurses were flabbergasted by a woman neurosurgeon, and they were like, who are you? Why are you here? And so I kind of think breaking those molds of what people believe neurosurgeons should look like was a big thing for me. And I didn't conceptualize it like that in the beginning, but now later in my career, I really felt like being visible and writing the book and all of that just speaks to how possible it is for people to do this.
What was it like for you in the early stages of residency and then as an attending with dealing with patients? Did you have any issues with anyone like taking you seriously as a neurosurgeon?
I mean, there are definitely times where you'll walk in with an older patient and they think you're the nurse, you know? And I think this happens to so many women doctors, not just neurosurgeons, but across the board. But, you know, once they realize they're speaking to the physician, it changes, you know, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And, you know, I think the biggest issues for me were when I became a mom. And that concept for people of a brain surgeon and a mother who's, you know, a pregnant neurosurgery resident, I think was a shattering conception for people you know, that I worked with. And I don't think they thought it was possible. And so that was really, I think that was probably the most challenging time I ever had in my career, was having my kids. Not so much as an attending, but definitely as a resident, because, you know, it wasn't seen, it wasn't done. And there was no maternity leave policy in the department.
Really?
So I wrote it. Basically, the director asked, hey, can you write the policy? You know, they had no idea how to manage a call schedule, how to manage time off, how to manage, you know, logging your operative cases, and do you have the necessary to complete and graduate on time? I mean, that was like, they had never done that before, you know? So I do know after me, they've taken several female residents, and I'd heard through the grapevine, one of them, you know, also had a kid. So I hope that, you know, I've hopefully shaped some of the culture around what was.
Yeah. How do you feel like the field of neurosurgery is changing, especially in regards to adding more diversity and more women into the field from like when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely gotten so much better, I think, for women. I'm seeing lots of medical students interested in neurosurgery. You know, I'm on the board of Women in Neurosurgery. I'm the chair of outreach. You know, we've definitely seen, even in the meetings, this enormous increase in interest. We started the social media committees, which has really helped to get the word out about who we are. And we try to be as visible as we possibly can, you know. So I think we've done a good job, but there's a lot more to go. And there was a paper that had come out in the White Journal of Neurosurgery recently that said to reach gender equality would take 150 years in neurosurgery.
Wow.
So we've made enormous strides, but we're not at equality. I mean, there's only 4 female chairs of neurosurgery departments in the United States.
What do you feel like is needed to change that? Or do you think, with what you know, your experience currently in the field, is there a way to make that 150 years shorter, and how do we even get there?
I think, you know, leadership, mentorship, really in academia especially, you know, having people to support women through those times, because women are childbearing and they are juggling multiple things. And, you know, unfortunately, to get ahead sometimes in those sorts of environments, people don't have kids, or they, you know, have, you know, the male figure is the one that rises academically. So support, mentorship, and good leaders, I think. I mean, so I think, you know, there's only so much that we can do. But I think if we have a goal for what the next 5 or 10 years looks like in the field, I think, you know, we can make a lot of strides.
For those that are listening that maybe want to go into the field of neurosurgery, that are young women and are maybe like looking for a mentor, I guess, what is some feedback or advice that you wish you would have gotten in your early stages? Because I feel like just in general, the topic of mentorship is very challenging. And I think in general, like even in my previous career, like finding a mentor is very challenging, and finding a good mentor is even more challenging. So what do you feel like are maybe some things that you would love to either share with the community of like, this is what we need more of, or this is what you should look for in a mentor? Just like, how would you, I guess, summarize like the need for mentorship in neurosurgery for young women?
I think matching with somebody that, you know, and I mean, I've served as a mentor for many students through the years that are in different stages of their careers. And, I have one mentor or mentee right now who, she'll text me on a Sunday. She's getting her personal statement together and she wants someone to look at it. And, you kind of have to be there for them, right? I mean, I kind of think about them as my kids a little bit. I have 3 kids, but they're also my kids, these mentees, because they're looking at me for advice. And so I think the relationship goes both ways, right? The mentor needs to be available, but the mentee also needs to understand that the mentor has many things that they're doing, But, I think, faculty advisor is kind of what I've done as my role. Really going to conferences, I think, is really great for students. Being able to meet neurosurgeons or doctors that you want to have a relationship with, you want to get to know them, even shadow them in their offices and their clinics. So that's the type of thing I would do early. And I've noticed so many medical students are doing that now, more so than 10 years ago.
I'd love to transition into talking about your book, Cutting a Path. And so I know that you are currently also writing a second book, but even before you wrote your first book, did you have an idea in mind? Did you always say like, hey, I want to write a book one day? Like what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so the book, it was something I always wanted to do. I come from a long line of authors. So my grandfather wrote like 50 books. He wrote the national textbook for economy in India. And my mother was also an author, so she wrote a book about India. So I always felt like I wanted to write a book, and I'd have all of their books on my bookshelf, and I would look at them, and my kids look at them. And so it started in my residency, and it was my 5th year, and I was pregnant with my first daughter, Amara. And I was resecting a brain tumor. And all of a sudden I got hit by this massive wave of morning sickness. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm operating with the chair. He's letting me resect the tumor. I'm a 5th year resident. And so it was this conversation I had with myself, which was, I can't scrub out of the surgery. Like, I'm helping this patient, he's trusting me to do this. I want to do a good job. I want to learn. And I almost willed away the feeling of morning sickness. And when I did that, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to write this stuff down. Like, I'd never read a book about a woman neurosurgeon who's going through all of these things. I'd never read a book, really about a woman neurosurgeon managing family life. I mean, there was a book written by Katrina Furlick called Another Day in the Frontal Lobe, which I read, but it was more about like her day-to-day. So I started writing all these stories and had a notebook and just kept logs basically. And then it kind of got pushed to the side, right? I had a second child. I started as an attending. I had a third child. I moved. And I had this notebook full of this stuff. And so then about 5 years into practice, I mean, it took that long, I started having medical students, women, men, approach me and ask me why I went into neurosurgery and what was the story, what was the reason. So I decided to finally, formally write the book. And so I started voice memoing all these stories that I had remembered. And I hired a transcriptionist, and she put everything into a Word document for me. And then I had this 120,000 word manuscript, and it was like, what do I do now? So then, and this is like fast forward now 8 years into this, I had done an article for Gwyneth Paltrow's magazine Goop, and it was on women and stroke. And they had said, hey, you should get in touch with our literary agent. She signs a lot of our authors. And so I called her up and I sent her this document and she's like, this is fantastic. Let's work on it. And so that's really where it began. I was fortunate to find a literary agent. They're so hard to find. I mean, they're so elusive and so busy. And, they have lists of books and certain types of books they take. So she really helped me. Colleen O'Shea is her name. She really helped me. We're good friends now to this day to really, take the manuscript and make it into something that would really grab people and chronology of the stories. So that's really what it was. And she found me a great deal with a publisher that I really liked and I trusted to put the story out there. It was really big for me to have editorial control over the work.
Well, that was my next question, because I feel like a lot of times in book publishing, you can find an agent or a publisher and they might like kind of change your initial vision. Do you feel like the book that you put out sticks to the vision that you initially wanted?
It is the vision that I wanted.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is, because I had the right of first refusal on any of the editor's changes.
Okay.
So essentially, and I chose that publisher for that reason, you know, and in some publishers you may not. I mean, they may completely change the story, but I wanted it to be authentic to who I was. And knowing that, you know, my kids will read this, their kids will read it. And I wanted it to be, you know, true. I also didn't want to hurt people in their careers. And so I didn't want it to be an expose or anything like that. It's not about other people. It was about me and my journey. And so that was very important to me too, was to keep it that way.
What were the hopes, or what are the hopes that when someone reads your book, what do you want them to walk away with?
I want them to know that you can persevere through incredible obstacles. And, you know, sometimes trauma is actually what pushes us forward. And you can take trauma and take things that have happened to you in your life, like my mother's illness, and you can transform it into something that's positive and meaningful to people. And some of the people that have reached out to me from all over the world, you know, Jordan, Turkey, I've had students from Nepal reach out to me that have read it. I mean, it's just incredible, the reach and the power of the word, you know, the written word. So perseverance, obstacles, hurdles, all of those things, I think they're not insurmountable. And I really want people to realize that when they read the book.
Since you finished writing the book, what kind of challenges have you gone through that if you were to write a second book that you would include?
Oh, wow. I think if I were to write a second book, it would maybe be more raw. Because I'm still practicing in my career and I'm still seeing patients and they're looking at me in a professional setting. And I feel like if I were to write it 10 years from now, it would maybe just be a tell-all, you know, as a possibility. Or, you know, maybe it would be, and I've even thought about an idea of writing a fiction book. And having a female neurosurgeon as the main protagonist and like a medical mystery series. So I've even thought about doing that as like another angle.
Well, I know you were also currently writing a children's book that's not focused on neurosurgery. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so that book is actually, it's a middle grade fiction book, and my co-authors are my kids.
Oh my God, no way.
Yeah, so my kids wrote it with me, and it's a story about a tiger growing up in the jungles of India. And kind of, she's the main heroine, and it's about her meetings with people, rangers, people that are exploiting the tigers, and how they kind of band together in the jungle to you know, help themselves and save all the other tigers. And so we started writing it during Tiger King, actually. So,
okay.
Yeah. So we kind of, you know, and then we had gone on a safari in India and seen tigers. And so that story kind of got put together. So it's actually a trilogy. So it's the first book of three.
Oh man, I'm so excited to read it. We were actually in the process of like writing a children's book about glioblastoma. Still in process, but it's hard to write a book.
It's tough, but I think that book would be incredible to put out, you know, so that kids can kind of understand.
Yeah, I might pick your brain about that afterwards. In regards to your day-to-day practice, I mean, you are now a new position at Chicago School of Medicine or Chicago Med School. Chicago Med School. Yeah. You were previously at Northwestern. You've got 3 kids and an author. What doesn't she do? I mean, how do you manage all of this?
You know, I think I'm a planner.
Okay.
And you know, my kids, I have the whole schedule planned out for the year. And it's like, this is what I'm going to do. You know, I like kind of a rough, you know, map of everything. I try to have goals for myself, my family, and my professional goals. And so I kind of put them into 3 buckets. And I started doing this in residency because they kind of made us. They used to say, you know, write your goals and objectives every year. And it was great because we would write things like, I want to learn how to do this surgery, or I want to do 20 cases of this. And there were these like little carrots that we would give ourselves to try to get through the work, you know? And so when I graduated, I started keeping a Word document of what are my personal goals? Like learn to ski, like what are my professional goals? And what are my family goals? Like what are my goals for each of my kids? And at the end of the year, I look back on it and I just kind of say, where am I with these things? Did I achieve what I wanted to? And so I think I'm a very goal-oriented person. I'm a project-oriented person. And if I don't have a project or a goal in front of me, that's kind of when I falter.
Mm-hmm. What are some goals that you have for this year?
So I'd like to get out the second book. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of in the developmental editing phase. So we're kind of hoping to seal the deal with our publisher for the kids division by the end of the year. I want to learn how to swim freestyle because I have no idea how to freestyle swim. Like I've been like a breaststroke swimmer my whole life. What else? Oh gosh.
About professionally,
so I've integrated robotic spine surgery into my practice. And I did that about 4 years ago and kind of switched over all my instrumentation to robotic. And I really like to build that right now, that program. So that's been one of my big goals.
What inspired you to incorporate robotics into your program?
Part of it was access. So Northwestern had purchased a robot for us.
And also, like, what does that look like for someone that's listening? Because I also am curious, like, what does robotics in surgery look like?
So the robot actually is, it's about, think about it like, it's like a bed attachment. So if you think about an operating room table, the robot kind of comes underneath the table and attaches to the bed and has a screen. And what it does is essentially it allows you to be more accurate with your instrumentation placement for screws and things like that in the spine or cages that you're putting in the spine. And so you do a CT scan that essentially, shows you your exact trajectory, your exact length. And so the screws are actually put in through small stab incisions instead of big cuts. So it's less blood loss, less time under anesthesia, more cosmetic. So a lot of younger female patients kind of seek me out to have those types of operations. I had a model who I did it on. She didn't want the big cut down her back. And so, it's more cosmetic, if you will, in some ways. But at the same time, I think it's the way we're going in neurosurgery. I think we are going to a place where it's smaller incisions, less OR time. These surgeries are same day. So patients come in the morning, they have the operation, they go home same day. And that's really, I think, the wave of the future. Even for cranial surgery, may not be same day because people need to stay, overnight and so forth. But using AI, using robotics, I think that's where we're headed.
Speaking of cranial surgeries, of course, the podcast is called Glioblastoma AKA GBM. So let's just talk about glioblastoma or brain tumor surgeries for a second. Typically during surgery, what does blood loss look like?
It depends on size and location of the tumor. Some GBMs can be extremely bloody because I think of them as parasites in the brain, truly. Because what they do is they pull blood supply to themselves. And, I've resected a lot of really bloody GBMs. And so blood loss could be 50 cc's to 100 cc's. Smaller ones, maybe not so much, but classically it's because the blood vessel supply is kind of entangled within the tumor.
And typically when you're resecting a tumor, whether it's smaller or larger, let's say it's on the larger side and there is more blood loss, do patients typically have to have like a blood transfusion? Or like how does that, I guess how as the neurosurgeon are you gauging like what needs to be replaced if X amount is lost? And like at what point do you do that?
So most patients are what's called type and crossed, which is their blood type is taken pre-surgery, kind of like with your pre-op labs. Mm-hmm. And so blood is usually held in the blood bank in case it happens. So it's not like oh no, we don't have blood to give to the patient. Usually with blood loss and surgery, the anesthesiologist is keeping track of the vital signs, the urine output, the IV lines, and what fluids are going in. And if there's a time when the vital signs are changing because there's volume depletion or there's less volume, typically at that point we would give blood. It's not very common to have to give blood for tumor surgeries. It certainly can happen, but it's not the norm.
What is urine output in surgery?
Urine output can be anywhere from 500 cc's to 600 cc's.
But it just like naturally happens?
There's a catheter placed.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a bag under the table that's basically, holding urine. So it's...
That's so interesting. I've like never heard of that.
Yeah.
And I've talked to like, it's never come up. And I was just curious. Like I didn't know that. I guess I didn't think about it, but that it naturally happens during surgery.
Yeah. So catheters are usually placed, when the patient's asleep, and then the urine output is tracked.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What is your most favorite part about conducting brain surgery?
Solving the problem, being able to review an MRI, understand how do I get there and how do I stay safe. And then once you kind of understand how to get there and how you stay safe, meaning how do you not affect good tissue, right? Because the brain has what's called eloquent tissue, which is tissue that has your motor, your sensory, your speech. So with brain tumors, it's all about how do you navigate around the really high-priced real estate, if you will. And, the best part to me is when the tumor is fully taken out. And it's that last moment when it's out and you're handing it off to the nurse to send to the pathologist at the lab. And it's kind of like that job well done for the patient because you've hopefully given them more time, with your resection.
What is the most nerve-wracking part about brain surgery?
I think nerve-wracking is when you get into trouble, when there's a lot of blood all of a sudden from an artery maybe, or, not that it can't be handled. I mean, it's handled, but, and then the nerve-wracking part too is sometimes, wanting the patient to wake up and not have any deficits, neurologic deficits. So it's always nerve-wracking after the anesthesia is off, they're in the ICU, and then getting them to move their arms and legs because you want to make sure that there hasn't been any deficits.
During surgery, what are some like protocols or precautions that you take to prevent deficits when the patient wakes up?
So you can use what's called tractography. So that's basically MRI imaging that shows you where all the tracts are. And I think that's phenomenal technology that's come out because now we can say, oh, here's the language area. Here's the motor strip. So we can avoid those kind of critical structures. So that's one big thing, I think. And then, of course, there's awake surgery, right? So there's awake craniotomy where the patient is awake and you're resecting and they're able to move their arm or they're able to speak to the neuropsychologists.
What did people do before tractography? Because, that's new technology. Like, did people, X amount of years ago, they just go into someone's brain and hope for the best? Like, what did neurosurgeons do? So
I vividly remember, because I did my residency before navigation came out, sitting with one of my senior attending neurosurgeons, and we were studying an MRI and trying to figure out what was the best target to get somewhere. And he literally said, see this right here? This is the bump on the skull. So this is the bump on the skull on the patient that we're going to go to. So like you basically using surface landmarks.
Okay.
Skull surface landmarks, which is somewhat archaic. You know what I mean? So, we've come light years from that. This is why I think we're kind of poised and ready for this revolution of smaller incisions, less blood loss, same-day surgeries. We're heading in that direction.
What are you most excited about with the developments in neurosurgery?
I think AI and robotics are really the most fascinating things to me. I think we haven't even touched the surface of what things will look like in 5 years. They have now robotics or VR goggles that can be put on. I did like a test run, or I'm not sure what the proper verbiage is, but I went to one of our partner hospitals that we funded before and tried. It was with Medtronic, I believe, and I was just like, it was so cool. Because you guys actually know what you're doing with it, but I'm just here touching the screen and playing with it. I'm just like, oh my God, the brain. I thought it was fascinating. I was like, this is so fun. Yeah. So I should become a neurosurgeon. And then I was like, I can't go to school for that. Too long. My discipline's not there. It's really great because you can actually, and the applications of it, they're so varied, but you could put on the goggles and at some point we'll be able to talk to a surgeon in a different country and go through a surgical case. You know, I mean, you think about how phenomenal that is. One of my dear friends is a surgeon in Malawi, and she did her residency with me at Brown and, you know, decided to go home. Actually, she had grown up there as a, you know, I think her families were missionaries, and she works there, and she was telling me about some of the conditions that they're working in. And it's mind blowing, you know, to think that in 2024, we're performing surgery like this. You know, I mean, there's no electricity. There's, you know, so I think about these applications that we're seeing with robotics and AI, and I'm thinking, when is this going to get to a place like Malawi? You know, and where the electricity goes out while you're operating. You know, and so I don't know the question to that. I do feel like global health is, you know, it's been a huge passion of mine. And, you know, I've operated in India, Middle East, many different places. And I think if we can somehow harness the power of AI to even train other surgeons across the globe or use telehealth. You know, one thing in India I find so fascinating is that everybody has a cell phone, you know, even in small villages. I mean, imagine if you could go on with a doctor and show them, you know, your child or yourself, or you have a cut, or you're not sure if it's infected, or I mean, think about the global health applications of that.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's a lot that can be done.
You talk about, I mean, it seems your explanation about like the book that you've written in your family's culture, that you're connected to your Indian heritage. What do you feel like is possible to be done? I mean, you mentioned that like one of your good friends is a neurosurgeon in Malawi. Do you feel like maybe one day you want to be able to go back to India to be able to kind of like help improve the healthcare qualities, especially in like neurosurgery? Or do you have any like, I guess, passion project style goal that relates to improving healthcare in India?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I have several projects that I'm trying to get off the ground right now in that regard. They're all in varying stages with different people, you know, but I would love to bring, you know, updated healthcare to India, and not just the big cities, because the big cities they're pretty good. It's really those villages and the even more remote areas where there's just such a huge opportunity, and not even just for neurosurgery, but preventative health. I mean, we're talking diabetes, high blood pressure, strokes, you know, things like that. I think, you know, there's definitely some ideas I have about how that could be tackled better.
Do you think it's like lack of funding, lack of infrastructure? Like, how do you think one would be able to kind of make that situation better?
I think infrastructure is a big thing. In India, especially. India is not as war-torn as maybe a place like Africa, right? So I think that's an issue. I think the geopolitics is always the problem, you know? And I'll give you an example. My friend who's in Malawi, she had told me there was equipment that was sent to do operations, basically. And she went to the operating room that particular day and was ready to do the procedure. And when she asked for the instruments, they were gone. And they looked all over the hospital, couldn't find them anywhere. So she couldn't operate on this particular patient that day. And that patient, unfortunately, then passed away.
Oh, wow.
And later they found that they hadn't been locked in the charge nurse's office and they were stolen. So it's things like theft. It's things like, you know, a lot of NGOs will come to places like India and Africa, and they'll have like their pet project, like cholera or typhoid or, you know, trachoma. And what happens is all of the doctors in the area then want to work for the NGO. So there's this brain drain of the local talent, you know, and the local talent tends to find better money elsewhere. So they're gone. So I think it's this circular problem, right? So you mean what I think conceptually has to happen with global health in India is kind of like a microcosm of that, is to retain the talent, right? And somehow, you know, maybe it is through government subsidies or maybe it is through the geopolitics of that country, but retain those people so that they're not wanting to leave and come to the United States for the residencies. They want to do it at home, you know? And so that's kind of my vision of it, you know, and where it goes from there, I don't know. But like I said, I do have a lot of global health interests and, you know, ideas about it. Well, and I think we're so privileged in so many ways, right? In the United States. I mean, when I was operating in India, there was no air conditioning, you know, so you kind of, and when I had come back to the US, it was, oh, wow, like I'm so fortunate to be here, you know. But, you know, I think like about healthcare in general and global health, like it's, you know, everybody should have access to that. Like if you're a human being on this planet, you should have global healthcare access.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a right, I think.
Yeah. What do you feel like it can inspire the next generation of neurosurgeons? Like if you could say anything to anyone that's like maybe thinking about going into neurosurgery, what would you tell them?
So someone had said to me, if you can imagine yourself doing anything else, do that. But if you can't, then you should be a neurosurgeon. And in some ways that's really true because I never saw myself as anything but a neurosurgeon. That was it for me. I mean, it was from, you know, being a kid to my mom's experience to her life being saved by this incredible person, really knowing that like in your heart, that's what you're meant to do. So, you know, I don't think you fall into the career. It's too lengthy. There's too much, you know, too much dedication that you need. I don't think you fall into it. I think you really have to have a calling.
Aside from neurosurgery, let's say not a career path, but if like in a past life or in another life, what would you be doing?
Oh my gosh. I have a lot of other interests, okay. I have to say. So I love archaeology.
Okay.
So I did a minor in archaeology in college. So I loved studying ancient Egypt and probably I'd be an Egyptologist, a journalist. I still love watching interviews of people and thinking about it and wondering what questions I would ask. So probably journalism, anthropology.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
If you were conducting this interview, what would you ask?
I would ask you. Let's reverse the interview.
Sure. Let's go ahead.
But first, I do want to applaud you for doing this because
Thank you.
I really feel like by your interest in speaking about GBM and putting your story out, you've touched so many people and you probably don't even know, you know, and that's the thing, why I love this podcast and what your organization is doing. So just to applaud you for that, you know, for channeling your trauma into something good.
Thank you.
You know,
I appreciate it.
And so I guess I'll ask you, what are your goals with this?
So I actually have that whiteboard over there. Those are like my goals for the year. It's interesting because when I first started the organization, I didn't have a goal. I was just like, I'm going to create what was missing during my family's experience with glioblastoma. And that was it. It was just like let's create things, let's create content, let's create different outlets of support, different campaigns, and we'll hopefully raise money while we're doing it. There was no strategy. It was, my background's like marketing, advertising, partnerships, like all the fun stuff. And I was just like, let's throw spaghetti at a wall. We're going to see what sticks. And it's grown to a place that I would have never, ever imagined. I mean, beyond any dream that I could have had for the organization. You know, we've raised over $1.5 million through social media. I mean, it's like, I was like, maybe I'll raise 2,000. Like when we started, like I had literally no idea what I was walking into. And the idea that this wouldn't be around if we hadn't started is crazy to me because it's such a lack of knowledge and like support in the space. So I'm super thankful for that. So that's like one goal is just to kind of continue what we're doing. This is the first year that we're doing a bunch of events in person, which I know you'll be at the New York one, which we're super excited to have you. So it's just trying to create, like, modernize fundraising. Fundraising is a very old industry and like operation, and we're trying to just do like new things because again, I'm trying to target like my generation, like millennials, Gen Z, and everyone younger than that. It's like not these very wealthy grandparent level of human being that are typically like very common donors, which are amazing, and we're thankful for all their donations too. But it's about like, how do you entice the next generation to want to get involved with charity? Because it's not as common, you know, as you get older, you have more funding and you're able to donate more to different causes. So kind of what we do is just try to target younger people and be like, hey, fundraising is cool. You know, as our partner nonprofit says, like, great for glioblastoma, it's cool to support brain cancer research. So we try to just do different things. That's kind of like some of the goals.
That's amazing. You know, I had a patient who unfortunately passed away of a GBM many years ago, and he was really young. He was in his 20s, and which, as you know, is very rare for a GBM. Mm-hmm. And he had just gotten married. And I remember sitting down talking to his wife. There were no resources for her, you know, and this is maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, their space was unfilled with, what do you do with these family members?
Yeah.
You know, and how do they feel, and how can they be helped with what content is put out there? You know, and so I think you're filling a space that really needed to be filled and providing hope for people, you know.
How would you, as a provider, provide hope for your patient and their family member?
I think communication is like the number one thing. And even in my own experience, like with my mother, Doug Johnson was an incredible surgeon, but the communication was lacking from the very minute we hit the hospital till the very minute she was discharged. You know, he would round very early in the morning, and most of the time families weren't allowed in. And by the time we would come in, we would have no idea what the plan was, you know, where she was at with her care. You know, so I felt like we were kind of dropped into this hole. You know what I mean? We didn't know who to talk to. You know, we would see the surgeon every now and again. We didn't know what the outlook looked like. And so I try to communicate with patients a lot about, like, what are things going to look like for your family member in 1 year, 2 year, 3 or 5 years, you know. And there's software that's out there now that you can actually record, you know, video calls. You can show an MRI to somebody and record it on a video and have it on a platform. And none of that existed. And I think, you know, I'm integrating that now into my practice. So I think communication, really.
Yeah. I think it's also hard as a provider, because I remember, you know, example with my father, it's like, you are operating, you have other patients to see. And it's, I think, challenging, especially for you guys in that position where you have to check on patients post-surgery, you have follow-ups, you have new patients, you have actual operating. And it's like the level, from what it seems like on an outside perspective, like the level of support and communication that's needed is so hard to keep up with because of how much you guys have to do. And I feel like it's a rock and a hard place, because it's like you want to be able to provide all this communication to your patients and be as supportive, but then you also have new patients, and it's like you have to it's so many things for you guys to do. I mean, I can't even imagine how challenging that is.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I think the key is a support system, like a team, and having, you know, PAs and assistants that really know what the plan is and going through the plan with those people, nurse practitioners, the nurses too. I mean, I think a team's approach is really how you have to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's just these massive gaps in communication, I think, that are really frustrating, you know, for families.
Yeah, I can't imagine with my dad's experience, but it's definitely challenging. But I think, you know, it's so great to hear about the work that you're doing and the path that you are cutting for, you know, what you're doing and for those future in neurosurgery. So I'm super thankful for you to have come on the podcast and share more about your background, what you're doing, and just for everyone to kind of like learn more about you and what's next.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I love coming here and visiting you in your beautiful studio.
Thank you.
And hopefully next time I come to be talking about book 2.
Definitely. Well, for everyone that's listening, you can, we'll tag your social medias below if anyone wants to get involved with you. And if this comes out before the New York event, you can see Dr. Sheri Dewan at our New York panel event. So we're super excited to have you. And if this airs post the event, thank you for coming to the event. I'm super excited to have had you on.
Wonderful. It's so nice to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Great.
Cool. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM. To learn more about the Glioblastoma Research Organization, you can visit us online at gbmresearch.org, on Instagram or Facebook at Glioblastoma Research, on Twitter at glioblastoma.org, or on LinkedIn as Glioblastoma Research Organization. To start your own fundraiser, to donate, or to learn how to get more involved with the organization, please email us at contact@gbmresearch.org, and we'll see you on the next episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM.